Who wants to learn a new opening? Today we're going to be learning the Behemoth Gambit. No, that's not the one. The Elephant Gambit. That is the name of the opening. What is the Elephant Gambit? So it is when your opponent opens with e4, you respond with e5, they go knight f3, and you play d5. So for thousands of years, e4, e5 was the most common opening in chess. White is known to gain an initiative when they play d4. Black is known to equalize when they play d5. That's a synopsis. How fast could you play d5? Well, if you're playing the Elephant Gambit, move 2. So what does d5 do? Well, it creates tension in the center. Do people like tension? No. Do people like early tension? Mega no. All right, so we're going to look at the main line. You're going to be 5 variations smarter or dumber by the end of this video. I recommend it to anyone under the rating of 2,000 or over the weight of 300 pounds. We're going to look over the main line first, right? If anybody ever asks you, do you want the good news first or the bad news first, you always take the bad news. So we're going to look at the best white has, and it's not even that bad. So we got pawn takes pawn. That was a clearance sacrifice. The best move they have is queen to e2, pinning the pawn to the king. But keep in mind, this makes the light squared bishop worse, kind of resembling some Petrov main lines, if you will. You guard the pawn, and here, there's really 2 main moves. I'll show what to do if they go knight g5. Logically, you just take the pawn on d5, you aim at the knight, you guard your pawn. Not so serious. All right, what else do they have? Well, they have knight to c3. What do you do against knight to c3? You play bishop e7. You might say, hey, well, that's a little passive, and wait a couple more moves and see what you think. You gambit the pawn, they take the knight, you take the knight, and their queen is awkwardly in front of the king. And you're going to pick up this pawn. So you're either going to win the queen or the pawn, right? If they go d4, you just take the pawn, and later on, their queen is misplaced. And you are ahead in development. Your bishop is very nicely placed, and your pieces all just come out nicely and coordinate quickly. So that's if knight to c3. What do you do if they go pawn to d3? Well, you take the pawn. Now, either they're going to take the pawn or they're going to go knight c3. Move order is, move order. It's chess. If they go knight c3, you pin the knight. Now when they take on e4, their knight is pinned. So before you would have just taken on e4, now you're still taking on e4. You do not lose your queen because they are pinned. Right? If anything, if they trade, it actually benefits black. This would be a slightly better position for black because you're exerting more pressure. And the e and d pawns are gone. So it's all going to be about development, coordination, and you are ahead in both of those. Now, my student actually showed me this opening. He showed me his tournament game. I was like, wow, I've never heard of this. I'm uncultured. I'm quite rude. But that's it. That was the whole statement. He's like, what would you do against the Elephant Gambit? I said, I would go d4, right? You got to counter gambit a gambiter, swindle a swindler. That is the moral of the story. That is why I like to play chess. So pawn to d4 is a counter gambit. And what should you do? E takes d4. This is the beauty of the game. These are the types of positions that are fun. The square of pawns that always seem too hard to calculate. That's what chess is all about. E takes d4. I think the only logical way they would recapture is with the queen. Let me know if you get something else. I'll add it to the study. Comment your Lichess username down. I'll share the study with you. You gain a tempo on the queen, knight to c6, and they have 2 options here. The first option is taking the pawn. You're essentially always happy to trade into this endgame. You go knight b4, you aim at the pawn, you aim at c2. So they might get forked, they might lose their d5 pawn, or they might give a check first, a switch. Here you should go bishop to d7, as now you are not afraid of getting checkmated, so your king can leave and open up the e-file. They might play passively, they might play actively. Let's say they play actively, because I was told that's better. All right, now they got to defend the pawn. You kick the knight out, you win the pawn back, your king finds safety on f7, your pieces come out quickly. You can damage their pawn structure. Your rooks are in the game. It's an equal position. And that is what we aim to do as black. We aim to equalize first, then take the advantage when your opponent misplays. Let's say they pin you. Well, if they pin you, you do take the pawn. It might look scary. You're like, whoa, those are doubled pawns. And that is a fact. Those are doubled pawns. But if they take, again, endgame time, if they take this way, you get doubled pawns, but you get the open B file, so that's a trade-off, and you gain a tempo on the knight. Now, if they go knight to g5 is their best move, you just go king e8, do not get forked. They pick up the pawn. I like knight to e7 first because it can get to d5, but the moral is you're going to go pawn to f6, find safety, and it's very similar to the other line. Again, you've equalized. Long term, you have the bishop pair on a very open board. There are no central pawns, so the bishop pair will shine bright if you use it correctly. Now let's look over some sidelines. So say e4, e5, knight f3, d5, and say they take e4. Oh, by the way, if they go bishop to b5, maybe this will happen like under 1,000 on chess.com because see a check, give a check. Pawn to c6, you will end up winning a piece because you attack the bishop, you attack the knight. So that would be a nice little win. All right, knight to e5, saving the knight. If they do this, of course, you just take the pawn. Their only way to guard the knight really is d4. That is not awkward. En passant, again, you develop normally. If they kick your queen, I'd leave it in the center of the board because while this knight is on d3, their bishop cannot gain a tempo on your queen. And if this knight were to move, you would gain the first tempo, threatening checkmate. And again, it's just easier for you to develop. And if a queen is safe in the center of the board, it's not bad. It's only when your opponent are gaining tempo on it, kicking it around, that they gain the advantage. Here, neither is the case. So, again, equal game. Now, similarly, if they don't go knight e5, but if they go knight to d4, you're still going to take the pawn. If knight to b5, do not get forked. I would drop the queen back, and now it's like the French lines that we've discussed. Not French lines we've discussed, but the queen is on d7, as in that sideline. Typically, I'd believe they would be to retreat, and then you save the queen. You put it here in the center of the board. They cannot gain space in the center because you would have en passant check. So the queen actually stands very nicely on e5, aiming at a little bit of everything. You can kind of be fresh with some ideas. There are many ideas here. That queen x-rays everything. Now, last but not least, if they take the pawn on e5 with the knight, you go bishop to d6. They have to guard this knight. I don't believe they would move it. So they have to guard it. You take the pawn, bishop to c4, connecting on f7, as many people like to do. You snap off the knight. There's two logical moves here. The easy one is if they go d-e5, they cannot castle. You can castle. When you pick up this pawn, you will pick it up with a tempo. So very easy for black to play. Again, long term, you can castle, they cannot. The other move, the one you need to be careful of, is queen h5. Do not save your bishop because they are going to checkmate you in one move. So save your king, queen to e7. Now, if they take with the pawn, it's not great. You're going to go knight c6 and build pressure on this pawn. If they take with the queen, you are going to trade queens. And again, as similar in the last line, you're going to have the tempo gain. And if bishop to b5, you go bishop to d7, you can even castle queenside. It's a pretty flexible position. And I mean, if they remove the attacker from e5, look at this bishop. Do you want to deal with that bishop? I'm sure your opponent won't. So the elephant gambit, the behemoth gambit, give it a try. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you want the Lee chess study. Thank you as always for watching. Have a great day. Boom.